Okay, so today we're going to be going over the Core Subjects EC-6 exam just for the ELAR portion. And this is just part one of the review. There's a lot of content that is covered in this exam. And so I'm only going to be going over competencies 1 to 5 today. And this is just a warning here that there were changes to the core subjects exam. And so the current version, or should I say the new version, is going to be number 391. So if you have never taken the content exam for core subjects EC-6 before, ever, when you register for it and take it this first time, you want to make sure that you are signing up for the 391. And so if you are taking the 391, the difference is just that in the 391, they have removed some of those ELAR competencies. So for people that have tested with the 291, if you've already passed some of the subjects, then you're going to have to continue taking the 291, or else you're going to have to take the whole test all over again. So in other words, we have some individuals that took the 291 last year, and they passed, like 3 of the 5 subjects. So they want to continue taking that 291 just to, knock off those last 2 that they need. But if they switch over to the 391, they're going to have to take all 5 subjects again. So another difference between the 391 and the 291 is that because the 391 has fewer ELAR competencies, there's also less questions for the ELAR. There's less time for the ELAR, but that actually gives you more time on the other subject areas. And there's a couple more questions on the other subject areas. So it's kind of I guess it's more of a benefit to take just the 391 if you've never taken it before, just because you'll have a little bit of extra time with those other areas. So remember that everybody that is getting certified with core subjects EC-6, regardless of whether you're taking the 291 or 391 at this point, everybody does have to take the science of teaching and reading exam. And, we have a review that's happening later today, and then we're going to have a couple more reviews that will happen periodically to go over those competencies. So whatever was taken out of the ELAR for 291 was placed on the STR exam. So if you were reviewing with 240 tutoring using the 291 review, the stuff that you reviewed is still going to be on STR. So, it still served its purpose to review you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, sorry, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, actually. For registering for the test, I noticed that there's a 391 option before you get started on the registration, but once you reach the registration page to select your actual test, they only have the one that was up to December.
So once you get approved to test, our director, Ms. Amaya, she's the one who has to approve the 391, and then it should appear for you. It should allow you to do it. So if were you already approved to test?
Yes, and she actually had to approve it twice because it didn't come up the first time, the 391. So I don't know if I'm maybe looking at it wrong, but there's a couple of selection pages where one of them is, it says 391 on one page, and then as you proceed to select the testing, it's, I think, between the TExES test and the PACT test, and then when you get to that page, it only allows the 291. There's no 391 option anymore.
Okay, when did you last hear from her?
I think she actually emailed yesterday in the afternoon, and then I went ahead and checked again this morning.
Okay. Okay, if you can remind me, well, no, I think there might be an issue because this is new for us, so we haven't recommended anyone for the 391 yet. So that could be why. So I'll go ahead and just remind me at the end so that we can go ahead and follow up with that to make sure that everything's right on our end. But it should pop up 391.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so competency 1 is going to deal with oral language. And so with oral language, make sure that you are providing students with lots of opportunities to develop their listening and speaking skills. Okay, so it's both. And so we're going to go ahead and watch a little video clip. And so when we're watching this video clip, what I'd like you to think of is, how do children acquire language? Okay, so that's like our question that we are trying to find that answer for in this video.
Hi, I'm Taylor and welcome to Crash Course Linguistics. What was your first word? Maybe it was mama or dada or some other family name, or dog or ta for thank you. I've been told my first word was dada, so I was a super original baby. Before a child says their first word, they've already had to learn lots of other language stuff. Babies need fine motor skills to control their mouth and hands, and their vocal tract isn't even the right shape for making human speech when they're tiny. There's also a lot that has to happen in the brain before the first words. This is why it takes around a year for a baby to say their first word, but you can leave your first lesson in a new language with half a dozen words. In this episode, we'll learn about language acquisition, both when we're young and as we get older. Learning a language isn't like learning that the moon orbits the Earth. One fact and you're done. Instead, it's many, many tasks across all levels of language. Phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and so much more. There's a long-standing distinction in the research between the study of child language acquisition and adult language acquisition. Some linguists think that these happen by entirely different processes, and some think that they're almost the same process with some tweaks. We'll learn about both. Let's start in the womb. By 30 weeks in the womb, you can feel physical sound waves through the amniotic fluid. It's a bit like listening to the radio with your head underwater, picking up the overall intonation rather than specific words. Shortly after birth, babies are more interested in language sounds than non-language sounds. They also pay more attention to the voice of the person who gestated them and people who speak the same language than to other voices and languages. Not long after that, babies with signed language around them pay more attention to signs. Babies are great at tuning into language. Of course, we can't ask a baby, hey, what do you think about these two words? Instead, studies of infants make use of one simple fact. Babies pay a bit more attention when they notice something new. We can tell if a baby is paying attention using a method called high amplitude sucking. Babies suck faster on pacifiers when they're interested and slower when they're bored. So if you give a baby a pacifier with a sensor in it and then play ba 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 over and over again, they'll eventually get bored and slow down. If you switch the audio from ba 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 to pa pa pa, the baby starts sucking faster again. That's how we know they can hear a difference between those two sounds. They've learned phonemes. Also, if a baby has typical hearing, they can distinguish between any two sounds that are relevant for any spoken language, up until about 6 to 12 months. Around that age, babies lose the ability to distinguish between sounds that aren't relevant for any languages they're exposed to, which helps them pay attention only to the parts that are important. After babies begin to figure out how their hands and mouths work, they start babbling. Babbling is what you might think of as classic baby talk, long, repetitive sequences of nonsense syllables. Babies who are exposed to sign languages, whether they're deaf or hearing children of deaf adults, also babble by making reduced versions of signs. The cutesy way that older people address children is called child-directed speech. In some cultures, child-directed speech is very distinct from the kind directed at people one's own age. In other cultures, they're more similar. But in both cases, kids learn language just fine.
Okay, so based on what we saw in there, right, looking at how it is that children pick up language, they kind of alluded to the fact that that babies are, I guess humans, right? We're just kind of born with some of these innate abilities and mechanisms. So there's a whole bunch of things involved, right? There's being able to hear it and understand that it is language, as well as being able to like form those sounds and speech. And so with this idea, they show that it's also exposure to the speech, right, by parents and caregivers. And so if you want to take a look at that, the whole rest of the video, we're going to see another piece in a little bit. But, towards the end of the video, it kind of mentions how in some cases, right, and I'm sure you may have heard of those, tragic cases where some kids just aren't exposed to any language, right, for whatever reason. And so they're not exposed to it very, very young. And so, at much, much older, they're really not able to grasp it or understand it. So it's something that they do have to be exposed to. And so children are going to be exposed to that by their parents, caregivers, whoever, whatever adults are going to be around at home. And then the children also have to interact with that environment. So if there's no interaction with the kids, that's why it's really important that, there's, the parents or caregivers have to be interacting with the kids so that they're able to understand how that works. So, children are able, babies, right? They're able to understand like, how conversations go back and forth. So you can like talk to a baby, right? And they may like babble back to you because they're kind of understanding how language is starting to work. So, when you look at all of the evidence, it kind of leads us to the fact that children are just born to acquire it, right? It's just something that humans, like, I guess, over time, we've just kind of evolved to be able to do that.
Their first word or two around 1 year of age. There's a lot of variation in this age though, and it depends on how eager the adults are. Easy syllables like mama, nana, baba, papa, dada, and tata are names for family members in many unrelated languages, suggesting that a lot of people want their baby's babbles to be meaningful. Even if you're more cautious, however, eventually toddlers are definitely in the one-word phase. When a child systematically uses one word plus one gesture, such as grabbing and saying cookie, to indicate they want a cookie, it means they're almost in the two-word phase, where they'll say want cookie. These milestones might not get the spotlight on social media, but they mark real progress in language acquisition. Let's visit the thought bubble to see some more language learning in action. Are you ready to do a linguistics experiment? Okay, this is a wug. Now, there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. If you said wugs, congratulations. You're doing as well as a toddler acquiring English. Before the wug test was introduced, many researchers hypothesized that children learn language by mimicking the people around them. And it's true that input is important. But wugs are imaginary creatures that children have never encountered before, and yet they still know how to form the plural of them. This shows that kids must have figured out generalizations or rules about how language works without ever being taught them. Rules that they can also apply to new words. The wug test was created in 1958 by Jean Berko Gleason, along with a host of other imaginary creatures like luns, tors, and gutches. Kids can deduce for themselves how to fit all of them into a sentence, just like you do when you learn or make up a new word. Kids don't just absorb language verbatim from older people around them, the way that you might download the full text of a dictionary onto your phone. We each figure it out and reconstruct it as a system inside our heads. That's how language changes each generation. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Language acquisition doesn't happen in a straight line of improvement. Children can learn a rule and then overextend it. A very young child might say went and then learn the rule that past tense is shown with the morpheme ed, like with danced and jumped. Then the child might go from saying went to goed. It looks like they're going backwards, but they've actually learned a new rule. But in general, children follow a similar set of milestones within a range of ages, from paying attention and babbling, all the way up to levels of double meaning, tact, and formal situations. These milestones are why linguists often talk about a critical period when it comes to learning language for the first time. However, linguists are still debating about exactly how long the critical period lasts, since we learn different parts of language at different times. Our ear for sounds is established pretty early, but complicated features like relative clauses take several years to learn. And we learn new words our whole lives. Exposure to at least one language in infancy provides the foundation that lets you acquire more advanced language skills and additional languages later in life. Of course, it would be highly unethical to deliberately raise a child without language for research. But some unfortunate real-life situations have given linguists insight into the critical period. For instance, when deaf babies are raised with access to a signed language from a very young age, they follow the same developmental stages as their hearing peers. From that solid foundation of language they have complete access to, they can learn further languages, including spoken or written language. But because of prejudice against deaf people, some deaf babies are raised without a signed language and taught only spoken language that they can't fully access. Many don't start learning a signed language until later childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, and their earlier language deprivation results in cognitive difficulties for the remainder of their lives. But as long as children are exposed to an accessible language, they do a great job with multiple languages. In fact, there's no cognitive limit to how many languages a child child can learn during the critical period. So if a family lives in Malaysia and one of the parents also speaks Russian, their child will easily learn both parents' languages. And if they move to Mexico when she's in preschool, she'll pick up Spanish too. The situation is more varied when it comes to learning additional languages at later ages. On the one hand, we can learn a second, third, or more languages by scaffolding off of languages we already know. And our teachers can use our existing language to explain things. That's why you don't see older language learners babbling for a year in Italian classes before figuring out that mom is mama. Plus, we've developed our fine motor skills, and it's way faster to learn how to read in a new language if you've already learned in a language.
Okay, so with this competency, you do have to know the stages of language development. You know, kind of like the age range that it happens and then what is happening in that stage. So the first one would be babbling or the pre-language stage. And so as I mentioned in the video, it's going to be around 0 to 6 months. Then there is the one-word stage, which is typically from 11 to 19 months. And then the two-word stage, which is 13 to 24 months. So this is something that, for example, you know, when you take your baby to the doctor's checking to see if your child is hitting these milestones. So, you know, in these age ranges, this is kind of where these things should be happening. So the next stage would be the telegraphic stage, and that is beyond 2 words, but not quite sentences. So in other words, I guess like, you know, if a baby could say like, give milk me. So they're not quite, you know, they don't get all of the parts of the sentence, but they understand like the meanings of the words. So that would be like in the telegraphic stage. Okay, the next one would be around ages 2 to 3. And in this stage, they're going to be able to follow 2-step commands, right? So you can give them 2 sets of instructions and they're able to do them. And then they're able to engage in short dialogues. So at around this age, they're understanding how sentences are put together. So instead of give milk me, right? It's, you know, it's give me the milk, please, you know, or please, can I have milk? So they kind of have their shorter sentences, but they understand the way sentences are structured. By age 4, they're going to be able to do more complex sentences, but they're still going to have difficulty verbalizing. So they're going to understand a lot more. And, you know, they kind of talk about, you know, you hear about like the terrible twos and all that. And a lot of it has to do with this fact that they just can't get out what they're trying to say. So at age 4, they're still having those issues with getting out their, you know, what they're trying to, you know, that's what they're trying to say. So at age 5, they may have challenges with embedded meanings, but have mastered different tenses. So in other words, you know, when you have like, what is it? Oh my gosh, can't think of the term. Like when you say something, but it's not really what you mean, like oh my gosh, I can't think of the word. Like, in other words, their understanding is very literal. So they're not going to get those hidden meanings. Sarcasm. Or yeah, sarcasm, but also like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking, because my son is at this age, and when I tell him things, I'm like, it's just a figure of speech. It doesn't like literally mean that.
Figurative language, basically.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so they're not understanding that. So everything is very literal to them. And so they can identify as well as produce specific sounds and blends of phonemes. So before that age, right? So like 4, 2, and 3, they are saying the words, but the sounds aren't quite coming out correctly because they're just not, you know, they're either not hearing them or not able to like, you know, verbalize them quite right well. But at age 5, they should be able to start producing those specific sounds. Okay, so then from age 6 to 7, they should be very fluent and clear speakers, but they may still have difficulty with these sounds. So with the v, ch, and sh, right? So if you have a child that's around that age, some of these may kind of sound the same, right? They're still, you know, working on getting the differences between those. And they may also use a w in place of or o. Okay, so again, it's what they're hearing and it's not, you know, what they should be saying. Like in other words, so there's still like some issues with that connection. So from ages 8 to 9, that speech is going to continue to develop and evolve. And so then you get to, your students, as they get much bigger, they are, they should be pretty fluent in terms of language. So Noam Chomsky and LAD, so he was a linguist that believed that children are born with that ability, right? So we kind of talked about how humans we have this ability to learn language. And so he called it a language acquisition device, or an LAD. Okay, so he just kind of believed that that's what humans are born with, and that's how they're able to acquire language. Oops.
Language sets us apart. Other animals communicate, but they don't have anything approaching the sophisticated grammar of human languages. How is it that we learn to speak and think in language so easily? Young children become adept in a new language very quickly. Since the dawn of philosophy, thinkers have argued about whether or not we have innate ideas, whether we are born knowing things, as Plato believed, or rather, as John Locke and other empiricists argued, the mind is a blank slate on which experience writes. An American linguist, Noam Chomsky, gave a twist to this debate in the 1960s by demonstrating that children learning to speak just don't have enough information to form the complex grammatical maneuvers that allow them to generate unlimited new and original sentences. Yet they do so with ease. There's a poverty of stimulus. Something else must be going on. Chomsky's hypothesis was that there are inborn structures in our brain, what he called a language acquisition device, or LAD, which gives us a natural propensity to organize the spoken language that we hear in various grammatical ways. Without that, we couldn't get started as language learners. If he's right, language structure is hardwired as a kind of universal grammar. Our slates have been written on before we emerged from the womb.
Okay, so oops, went too many slides. Okay. So on this slide, what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go ahead and take a look at these competencies and domains. So go ahead and click on the link, and if you can, copy and paste it into another browser, because we're gonna be using it periodically throughout the session. Okay, so hopefully everybody got that. For those of you that just joined us, we've got Nearpod code here, so we're kind of working through this today. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna go ahead and click on this link just so you can take a look at what I would like for you all to see. Okay, so when you are studying for your content exam, you want to make sure that you are referring to this website. And I know some of you are just using 240 Tutoring, or some of you finished using 240 Tutoring. But what you want to do is scroll down and take a look at your competencies. And that's what we're going over today. So remember, I mentioned that we're going over the first 5 competencies. So the first subject exam is English. That will be the first exam that you'll be taking when you take the 391. And so for competency 1, right, it mentions what the competency is about, oral language, talks about it, and then it goes over all of these descriptors. So these descriptors are where it is that I'm getting information for today's review session. So when you're reviewing, you need to go through and look at what these competencies are. And if there's anything in there that you don't know, then that's something that you're going to have to research, something that you're going to have to get more information on, so that you will do well on this exam. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to put you into a group so that you can go ahead and read through the descriptors for competency 1. And based on what we've kind of talked about already, which descriptors have we addressed? And are there some items that you learned or that you already knew? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the 3 of you into a group so you can go ahead and do that. Does everybody have the link for the website, the TExES NEC? Can you give me a thumbs up if you got it? If not, so I can drop it in the chat. Yep. Okay.
No, can you drop it in the chat? I'm having like technical difficulties, of course.
Oh. Oh, okay. No worries.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Lisa. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you in a breakout room with Deanna so that you two can go ahead and address these questions here. Okay. Okay, so there we go. So what were some items that you all discussed? So was there anything that was new to you?
So Ms. Hinojosa, me and Deanna were talking about the fact, that we found kind of interesting the age groups of what they need to be like speaking at, like the levels. That's something that I didn't know, and that was like I found that really interesting. Also because I can relate to it because my sister has a little boy and he hasn't spoken, his speech development hasn't really developed. And so I was kind of thinking, because it's all this COVID, he's not interacting with kids and stuff. So I thought that was
Thank you. So thanks for sharing, Lisa. And that actually is something my husband had seen something in the news that because a lot of they're noticing a lot of developmental delays with children that are just in the daycares because all the caregivers are wearing masks. So they're not being able to make that connection, with the speech and the sounds and words and all that. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah, and my sister's super worried about her, her baby and everything, but it's like, how can he pick up anything if you guys just have him at home? He's not interacting with anybody else but you guys. So I know that with COVID, that puts a delay with kids.
Yeah, and so with that, and so like some important things to remember is that so we've got these abilities that we're kind of born with to be able to understand and be able to learn language. But a lot of that is also going to come with those interactions. So as long as your sister is interacting with the baby and talking to the baby, then the baby should be fine. So it's one of those things in some places. And I know I was reading somewhere, it was kind of mentioning how in some cultures, right, it's the kids do not participate in adult conversations. And I remember growing up, as Hispanic in my family, if adults were having a conversation, I couldn't participate. Maybe I was off on the side like listening, but I could not participate in that conversation. And they say that actually like the language development is a little bit less because they're not able to engage in that type of conversation. So I found that interesting as well.
Yeah, and like the part that you say real quick, that he is already going to be 2 and all he does is yell. And I told my sister, well, he's frustrated because he wants to talk, and that's the only familiar noise that he knows to make is yelling. Yeah. So hopefully he'll start talking.
yeah, I'm sure. It just, it's going to take some time. I know now is a difficult time as well. So when it comes to being a teacher in the classroom, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are promoting communication. So again, as children are going to be, there's going to be engagement that's happening at home, and, we don't know what type of engagement that is. Maybe it's only with siblings. Maybe it's, maybe they're like your nephew, they're the only child in the house, so they only interact with adults. And so that interaction is going to be different. So in the classroom, there's a variety of ways that you can have students interact with each other to make sure that they're working on that oral language. So these are a couple of examples. So there's dramatic plays, and with this, it's not necessarily like a play that's like a story, but it's more of like a role play of stuff that happens in real life. So you know, you tell the child you're going to be the mom, you know, and you tell another child you're going to be, you know, the dad, you know, like what kind of conversation would that look like? With language play, this is why, you know, for little kids, there's a lot of music and a lot of rhyming and a lot of songs, right? It makes the language fun, and by using these tools, it's going to help students remember those things. Okay. Another thing out there is show and tell. I know you know, as an adult, you know, before I became a teacher, I was kind of like, what's the point to show and tell? You know, like, I don't see how that is important at all. But the whole purpose of it is, again, for students to practice that oral language. And when you have students bring an artifact into the classroom, that's another way to also have the students share about their home and their culture. And that's something that you do want to be aware of as well, within the ELAR competencies. And when it comes to the STR exam as well, it's very important that you understand that we need to bring the students, you know, their cultures, their backgrounds, their, you know, all that diversity, we need to bring it into the classroom, because we need to make sure that our students are aware of all of those things out there. And it, you know, it also makes the environment more inviting, and it's more, you know, if something is interesting to the students, right? If it's like something that's relative to them, then they're going to be more prone to paying attention. So that's kind of how show and tell helps us. With puppet shows, that's going to also allow students to work on that communication, but with a little bit more confidence, because it's not really them speaking, right? It's the puppet that's doing the speaking. And then, of course, right, we've you know, talked about the fundamental 5 and all that, and that relates to those small group interactions. So it's really important to allow students to practice speaking to each other. So even, you know, even in a kindergarten, I've seen kindergarten classrooms where the teachers tell the students, you know, like, turn to your friend and, you know, talk to your friend about, you know, so and so, like, they'll give them a topic to do that. But that is going to allow students to practice speaking to each other. So, you know, kids their same age, but it's also going to practice, have them practice on those listening skills, you know, so here, you know, you got to listen, right? It's not all about you just talking. And then, of course, oral presentations are something that, you know, kids are going to be working on, you know, from like kindergarten all the way to like senior year, right? So when it comes to oral presentations, those expectations are going to be different. So just be aware of that. So I'm not going to have my kindergartner do the same type of oral presentation that I would a 6th grader, right? So for my kindergartner, it may be something really, really short. But for my 6th grader, it may be a, you know, a full on, like, you know, 5-minute presentation or something. Okay. Okay, so the next one we have here has to do with vocabulary. And so these are 6 components that teachers should clearly understand and be able to explain to students. And so these terms here, if you don't know what these terms mean or understand them, you definitely need to learn them, look them up. You know, there's, and I'm gonna share with that in a little bit, but there's like Quizlet where you can go through and just kind of, you know, expose yourself to those vocabulary terms so that you understand the differences between them. They're not only important for the ELAR competencies, but they're also going to be super, super important for the STR competencies as well. Okay, so we've got phonology, morphology, syntax, lexicon, pragmatics, and semantics. Okay, so all of these are going to be related to vocabulary and that oral language. Okay, and I know you came in a little bit late, Lisa, but I was telling Deanna that if I'm moving too fast, just to slow me down, okay? All right, so with this activity,
You know, I'm sorry to bother you. Can you send me the link in the chat? Because I know Deanna was trying to send it to me, and for some reason I can't open it, and I don't know what's going on this morning.
For this website?
The competencies.
Okay. Yes. All right, I dropped it in again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on this fill in the blank activity, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on it. And then if once you're done with it, once it's all completely correct, if there are any terms that you do not know, make sure that you do write down their definitions. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes. So I'm going to go back. Sorry, ladies. So phonology is the study of the sound system of language, and the basic units are called phonemes. So those are the individual sounds that make up the words that we hear. And then graphemes are going to be the individual letters that represent the phonemes. So our example, we have the word box, right? And box is made up of 3 letters. But when we talk about graphemes and phonemes, it actually has 3 graphemes. So the B-O-X. But when I listen to the sounds that make up the word box, I've actually got 4 phonemes. So we've got B, A, S, right? So we've got 4 sounds that are actually making up that word box. So this word has 3 graphemes and it has 4 phonemes. Then we have morphology, and that's the study of the structure of words as well as their formation. And morphemes are going to be the smallest representation with meaning. So in other words, if I'm just looking here like at this word smallest, right? When I break that word down, I've actually got the word small, and then I've also got that suffix of est, right? So for like this word, a morpheme would be, we would have small, and then we would also have est as those morphemes. Those are the small parts that actually make up the language. So they're not necessarily referring to words, right? But we're thinking of like word parts. So you've got like your root and your prefixes and your suffixes. Those are going to be those morphemes. Semantics are going to be the ways that meaning is created using language, right? And every language is going to have its own semantics. And then syntax is how you actually place words together in a language. And again, every language will have a different syntax. And so, you know, thinking about that, when we have students that are English language learners, other languages are going to have different semantics and syntax. And so when we're trying to teach students, you know, how to read and how to, you know, speak orally, they're also bringing in those rules from their other language. So, you know, for example, things in Spanish, you may say them in a certain order, but in English, you say them in a different order, right? So like those verbs and the nouns may be like reversed. And so students are going to kind of bring those ideas in with them. Lexicon is you're going to refer to the vocabulary of language, and the meanings of words can vary based on context, right? So we're going to take a look at a couple of those in a bit. You know, again, people that are non-native speakers, right? If their language, English was not their first language, they may have trouble with those different meanings because they may only know one meaning of the word, but when used in a different context, they may not understand that it has another meaning. So I'll say, like, for example, for me, I was not, my first language was English. And so Spanish was my second language. And so, like, for example, when my husband tells me jokes in Spanish, I don't get them, you know, because for me, it's very literal. I don't know all of those other hidden meanings or, you know, those second meanings that words have that, you know, have those word tricks that they can play on you. Pragmatics is going to describe how context can affect the interpretation of communication. So again, like we mentioned, those hidden rules that native speakers understand, but people that aren't native don't. So for example, you know, when you come into class, you know, or when you see someone in the hallway, you may say, "How are you doing?" And it's more of like a greeting or like a salutation, but someone that is not native to the language may say, "Oh, you know what? You know, this happened, that happened, you know, I'm doing great," and blah, blah, blah. They may go into this whole conversation and you would be like, "Well, I was just, you know, like, I was just looking for a great, you know, I was just kind of like saying hi." And then we've got semantics, which refers to how meaning is conveyed in a language using its vocabulary. And again, culture and context are going to play a role, as well as connotation and denotation. So connotation is like that, sorry, okay, I'm going to confuse these. So one of these is about the literal meaning, and the other one is going to be about that like hidden underlying meaning. All right, so let's watch this quick little video here.
Hi and welcome back to Family Phonics. In this video I'll be introducing graphemes. In the last video we introduced phonemes, the smallest sounds that can change a word's meaning. In this video, we introduce graphemes as a way of recording sounds in writing and print. The letter or group of letters that represents a phoneme is called its grapheme. Children often begin by noticing graphemes that are common, useful, or meaningful to them, such as the letters representing the first sound in their name. A few of the most common phoneme-grapheme pairs in English are s, e, t, p, I, and n. Learning which grapheme goes with which phoneme is a multisensory learning experience for your child. They will see the grapheme and hear the phoneme. You can enrich this learning further by adding actions, rhymes and songs, and physical resources. Making practice active and playful helps children to make stronger connections in their learning. Some phonemes are easier to match with their grapheme than others. There are 47 phonemes in the English language and only 26 letters, so sometimes we need to use a group of letters to represent a single phoneme. Here's the grapheme that commonly represents sh. It has 2 letters but only represents one phoneme. We call graphemes with 2 letters a digraph, and there are lots of those in English. Here's a grapheme that can represent the I sound in night. This one has 3 letters. It's called a trigraph. When your child begins learning phonics, they will learn the most common ways that each phoneme can be represented. Of course, there are often many ways of representing the same phoneme. Letters on paper are not intended to represent only sound. They are words with meaning. And phonics is not the only tool your child will need to learn in order to learn to spell. So, if it can lead to spelling mistakes, why is phonics an important strategy for my child to learn? Let's have a look at the traditional see and say approach to learning to read. If I learn to recognize the words pin and set, then I can write the words pin and set. If, however, I learn to recognize the graphemes for the phonemes s, e, t, p, I, and n, then I can write a whole lot more. Phonics speeds up the very early stages of reading and gives children the confidence to try new words as they build their early reading and writing skills. In this video, we've seen that a grapheme can be a single letter or a group of letters that represents a phoneme. In the next section of our course, you'll learn some practical ways you can help your child build up the connections between phonemes and graphemes.
Okay. So then I also put in here a video that you can take a look at later because I will give you the Nearpod link to this. But this video actually just goes over all of the phonemes. And again, if when it comes to the Science of Teaching Reading exam, the phonemes are going to be important. Okay. All right. So when it comes to this section, we want to make sure that we are assessing our students' ability to speak. And so you're going to be, and it's not like a formal assessment, but there's going to be a lot of informal assessments. And so when you are having students talk, if they're having conversations in the classroom, if they're speaking to, speaking to their colleagues, you always want to be listening to see if students are, kind of like where they should be, or if there are things that you're going to need to kind of work on with them. And so there are a lot of items to consider before determining if a student has a developmental issue or disorder. And so some of these things, we may think, well, we know, like I can tell if a kid has a speech disorder, like just by listening to them speak, but there are other things that we have to be aware of.